On top of knowing how to query the status, stop, and start services as a system administrator, you'll have to know how to configure services to meet the needs of your organization. For example, if you're running a DNS server, you'll need to configure the DNS zones that you want to serve. If you're running a web server, you'll need to configure the different sites and web applications that you'd like to have enabled. And in general, you'll want to apply any specific security and backup policies to all your services. The details will depend a lot on the operating system and the service. But let's talk about the basics that you'll need to know for all services. Most services are enabled as soon as you install them. These are programs that are shipped with the defaults that are good enough to safely start serving right away. But not all services can provide default values that are suitable for everyone. In some cases, you will need to edit the configuration files before the service can go live. On Windows, most of the configuration is stored in the registry. This can be modified using graphical wizards or using the set service command. On Linux, the configuration files for the installed services are located in the etc directory. And while some software may ship graphical configuration editors, you typically have to edit the configuration files with a text editor. Let's experiment with a simple FTP server called VSFTPD, a service that gets enabled by default when installed. So I'm going to go ahead and type in sudo apt install VSFTPD to install the service. Once it's done installing, the service is already running. We can query the status of the service by running service VSFTPD status and see that it's running. This tells us that the service is already running. We can also verify that it's running by connecting to the FTP server with an FTP client. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and type in lftp localhost. LFTP is an FTP client program that allows us to connect to an FTP server. When we tell it to connect to localhost, it'll try to connect to the FTP server running on localhost. Now, let's try to run the ls command to list the contents of the current directory. So I'm going to type in ls. And then type in exit. This is failing because it's requiring a username and password, and we aren't providing them. It makes sense that the default behavior of the FTP server is to be locked down. If we really want to enable anonymous connections, we'll have to do that explicitly. Let's modify the configuration file to allow anonymous connections. To do that, I'll edit the configuration file for this service that's located in the etc vsftpd config to change the anonymous enable setting from no to yes. So I'm going to go sudo vim etc vsftpd config. This will open up my config file. And I'm going to go ahead and change in the anonymous enable from no to yes. Save my configuration file. By changing the value of the anonymous enable setting from no to yes, we're telling the FTP server program that we want to allow anonymous connections. We've made the change, but we aren't done yet. If we try to connect again, ls will still fail. ls. It failed. I'm going to hit exit. This will also happen with other services because most services read their configuration when they start and then keep it in memory while they're running. In order for our service to reread the configuration, we need to tell it to reload. Reloading means that the service rereads the configuration file without having to stop and start. That way, ongoing connections aren't interrupted, but new connections will use a new configuration. Let's do this for our FTP service. So I'm going to type in sudo service vsftpd reload. Once we've done this, we can try to connect again, and this time executing ls will succeed. Let's see. It worked.